Hello, everyone. This is Pittsburgh Pat, and I'm here with Ryan Doyle of the Verdigris Table. How are you, Ryan?
I am feeling well this morning.
Yeah, we just last night. I feel like I just saw you. So like went to bed right. Actually, I did not go to bed right away. But anyway, let's talk about this. We do a recap of our gaming session, Dungeons and Dragons. We're doing 5.5 right now. We got the new rule books out. We got the player's handbook. Last night, we had both bought the new DMG from our local game store, Game Masters. Hello, Phil. Thank you for having those for us. And Wizard of the Coast is still doing the thing where you can only buy this like particular cover for 2 weeks in advance of the popular release at the game stores. Well, actually, I think this cover you can only get at game stores, right?
Yeah, so that you can only get the alternative covers. I don't know
Yeah,
what
I guess you
I
call
think alternative cover is like the official term of art for it.
it.
And yeah, they are so far are releasing things in your friendly local neighborhood game shop 2 weeks before you can get it, whatever, on Amazon or wherever else you might be
Right. And
buying
this is
books.
US only because we have some people who
Yes.
love to watch our channels, yours especially from outside of the US. So yeah, that's what we're forgive us for our America-centric attitudes, but that's what we're used to. And yeah, that's the situation right now. So yeah, so we're going to recap our Ghosts of Saltmarsh campaign, and we talk about things that come up that new players might be unaware of, and especially with the new rules, we all might be unaware of because we look up the rules as we play, and that's how we're kind of play testing this new system, and also new DMs or just DMs in general. A lot of DMs watch our channels and get ideas. And so we can make the mistakes for you and you don't have to. Or I'm just kidding. But, we have our own experiences we can compare. It's no mistakes in D&D.
Just happy accidents. Bob Ross taught me that.
Bad choices sometimes. I remember Patrick's character. There's two Patricks at our table. So if I say Patrick, I'll say Pittsburgh Pat for me. I'll say Patrick for you. And he said, "Oh no, another foolish decision." When he charges in with his paladin because he can buff himself so that he has like a 23 or a 22 AC and be the sponge, the damage sponge. So while the rest of us snipe at these giant creatures that you throw at us. And in fact, we started this session in the middle of a combat because we ran out of time the previous Tuesday night. So the game store was getting ready to close, and it was time to like stop because rounds were taking about 15 minutes. So
Yeah,
this is what happens at level 5. You got a lot of stuff to do.
one thing that hasn't changed and perhaps has gotten worse in the new updates is that combat can take forever. Now, you did kind of string together a few encounters at once. So what could have been three fights was one mega battle, which is
Mm,
way more fun and cinematic. I used a little bit of like stagecraft and like waves of enemies, so it wasn't quite a TPK right out of the
right,
gate,
right.
essentially.
Sure.
So I did spread those encounters out, but like I'm a fairly experienced dungeon master. I'm looking at what's set on the table and I'm looking at the clock, and it's like, I don't think I can finish this
Hmm.
before tonight's over because we have a hard out at 10 o'clock. They close the store.
Yeah, yeah.
There's no running late for us on Tuesdays. Um, but the fact that we had more fighting than time, sometimes I would stop early, but like we had 90 minutes. It was like 8:15, 8:30 when I was doing this math. I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna finish, but I can't stall for 90 minutes. And
Right.
we're fighting. So yeah, I don't even know. We went 3, 4 rounds and then paused, took pictures of the battle map, which is a nice little life hack for people. I
Good
wrote
tip.
down all of my side. I made sure everybody had like a pretty good idea of like, all right, what their resources are like for their player characters. Made sure we were at a place to pause, right? So I didn't like shut down at 10 o'clock. I was like, all right, we shut down at quarter 2 to make sure everybody had their I's dotted and their T's crossed, particularly me. And then yeah, set it up and hit the ground running, which is good for a hot start. I do like starting a session with combat
Yeah,
that
that's
has been
fun.
like teed up.
Hmm.
I don't necessarily love stopping in the middle because it was good, but it was also like the wrap up phase. It was a little it was less climactic a week later to finish that fight than it would have been to finish that fight that night when it
Mm.
was like, I don't know if we're getting through this, boys. You know?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So like thinking about pacing and drama, that's always a thing with DMs because we prepare as a DM a certain amount of material, but we're not sure how quickly our party's going to consume it, or if they might avoid things that we have planned altogether through either really good skill checks or just deciding they're going to go a different path. So this is the thing that we've been talking about a lot lately is the balance between over preparing and and feeling that having that feeling that we haven't prepared enough,
Hmm.
but relying on the tools. And I think that's what's happened in the new DMG from the videos that I've watched and the discussions that we've had on your channel. Every Friday, you're part of a DM chat and Casual Friday at 3 o'clock Eastern. And so we'll plug that for you. And I've been on that a couple times and I watch it when I can. And yeah, there's a lot of talk about using the DMG as a resource, using your book, Explosive
Mm.
Creation, right? Using tables and using encounters and being a more of a player at the table and being more surprised as a DM of what's going to happen. Now you're running this campaign from a book, Ghosts of Saltmarsh, which has been around for a long time, and actually the campaign has been around since the 80s. So there's a lot of good material out there to try to like give yourself backstory, and you can prep yourself ahead of time without just those books. There's a lot of videos out there to talk about how to do that, and you can use this one as well. So,
Yeah, and it's a pastiche of a lot of like so the Saltmarsh arc we're probably going to get into in the next like week or two, like the act three of that.
mhm,
But they've also taken some older and I guess more recent compared to Saltmarsh, like nautical themed adventures that tie in.
mhm.
They do a pretty good job. Like it's a good town. We've explored a decent amount of it. There's a lot of meat on the bone still for that can kind of tie it together. I've done a little bit of extra work to make things feel a little more cohesive and connected just because that's my preference and my style. I like the world to make sense.
Right,
And doing that, it feels makes me more adaptive. I don't know what you're going to do. I just know what's going on
right,
in these different places, what and in these different characters' heads, what their motivations are. So I'm not preparing like pre-built reactions to what I expect you're going to do.
mhm.
I am preparing to improvise, essentially, which kind of sounds counterintuitive until you experience it a few times. But like knowing what's going on, having the tools prepared to adapt, and just being like, well, okay, like you can burn this place to the ground. I gave you a boat. The second session, I was like, you
Yeah,
can ride off into the sunset and like go
yeah,
anywhere, do anything, and that is scary in some ways for the person who's responsible for like generating content in front of you, but it's also incredibly liberating to be prepared to do that. And now it's the fastest and most surefire way to avoid the impulse to railroad in my experience. It doesn't matter to me what you do. I mean, I have a vested interest in you guys like succeeding and creating an interesting story and making tension happen, but like I can't help but expect you to do certain things,
mhm.
right? But when you thwart my expectations, it's fun for me, not scary. It's like, oh, I did not expect them. Like I thought this would be a fight and this is a social encounter, or the opposite. I thought this was going to be a social encounter and it's a fight, or we're gonna, explore things in certain ways.
Well,
Um,
for example, I mean, we're cutting ahead a little bit in the timeline by my saying this, but so after we clear the battlefield from like what had previously our encounter that was the cliffhanger, we take a long rest and these three manticores show up.
mm,
So, our buddies are like, what should we do? And we're like at first pretty timid about it because we're maybe overestimating our abilities versus their abilities, but we decide we were going to like confront them and instead of just ambushing them and getting into another combat because we had just gotten out of combat, we decided maybe we'll try to talk to them. So and we did. So there was a possible combat right there that turned into a social encounter, you know.
For sure. And good plans, good rolls. You guys had like a backup plan. I was impressed. You had like a plan A and a plan B, and
Usually
you
we don't.
executed them too. Well, usually you'll have like seven plans and then just like rush in. And I think that's true for
Right.
most D&D parties.
Right.
Um,
That's very true. In fact, at one point we came across a door that we had previously pick locked and it was locked again. And I just said, is that door locked? And I went down and locked it. And then you said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know what the plan is. I'm a rogue. I want to pick the lock, and not stand on the side of the door that swings open this time so I don't get hit with
Hmm.
bludgeoning damage if somebody comes roaring out. So I at least learned a lesson there to stand on the opposite side of the door.
And it's a
Uh,
very interesting scenario in that room. And like I've done some adaptations, but it's like the bones of it are there in the book. And part of it is a reaction to what you guys have done so far on this island.
mm,
But this is an evil cult that's licking its wounds. It just got defeated. They're literally like sheltering in the basement of their abbey. The rest of the
right.
abbey's like torn down and like still smoldering around them. So they are very clearly evil. I've telegraphed that in a way where like the evil cult's not going to tell you they're the evil cult, right? They don't
Not
consider
from their
themselves
point of
evil.
view, they're not, right?
Yeah, but
Necessarily.
they're up to some creepy shit. They're surrounded by undead guardians. Um, so the impulse is like, here's all of these indicated. These are bad guys, right? Here's all of the markers of bad guys, but they are defeated and afraid and like fractured, right? The
Yeah,
leadership
they lost their
structure is
leader,
gone.
right?
So there's different camps, there's different ideas of like what should happen next. So what could very well be a fight in a different on a different night, essentially with the same people. It's been a lot of social encounters and like it's essentially it feels like a puzzle in some ways. Like are we just gonna slaughter all these people? We could, maybe we should. What's the argument there?
Yeah, morally,
And it
right?
creates
Maybe we should.
yeah, and it creates a lot of interesting, some of it ventures into table talk, and I'm pretty permissive of the meta game, especially in whatever, the friendly local game store where we're like constantly being interrupted by like friends coming up and saying hi, like we're part of a community there. It's not just, I say distractions a lot and that has a negative connotation, but it's like, oh, hey, how you been? Or like, oh, I'm gonna like, there's a coffee shop 40 feet away. So it's just like the siren song of like a muffin or a chai latte is always there too.
Yeah, we had like 20 people in costumes at the
Yeah, it was
social
Halloween last night.
gathering. And so like we're looking around and observing other people in their costumes and really good ones too, some of them. So, that was pretty cool. Yeah, and it is kind of becoming a community too. Matter of fact, we should probably acknowledge that we had somebody come up and pay our table fee last night.
Yeah,
That was pretty hip. So
yeah,
thanks, Julian.
appreciate.
Yeah,
I think he did the whole place, I think.
I don't know. That's
I think
pretty
he
expensive.
it adds up. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a very affordable. I mean, $5 for a night out for 4 hours. I mean, I ended up
yeah,
spending more. I bought the DMG and I bought coffee and whatever.
sure.
But $5 to rent a seat all day, as far as Phil's concerned. Like he won't even charge you till I forget. We changed it because of the coffee shop, but I think like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. But like that's cheap.
Yeah,
But
so
you
I
do
think
that
the
for a
deal
hundred
is,
people. Oh, it's a different story.
yeah, I think the deal is like if you come in and order coffee, or if you order something from the coffee bar and just sit and play. Oh, I know what it was. He has a deal. He has a thing. He did a thing so that like, let's say a family wants to come in and play Monopoly. Um, he's not going to charge every single person in that family to play
Yeah,
Monopoly. So if you're just
yeah.
going to play one game and you're going to like sit there with your family while you have some donuts and coffee, then it ends up being like a set table fee or something.
Hmm.
It was like $7 on top of whatever,
Right.
something like that before 4 p.m. After 4 p.m., then it's, you know, I think that's how it goes,
Yeah.
if I
I
remember
mean,
correctly. But he's playing with it too. So like, don't get me in. This is going to be posted. Actually, it's the day before Halloween, 2024. So if you're watching this 2 years from now, who knows what will have changed.
here's a time capsule for you to compare inflation prices.
Hopefully yeah. Hopefully 8% inflation's over. But yeah, so we got into combat, mid-combat. We had an NPC, a friendly NPC down.
Mm.
Roll his second saving throw, death save, and roll a natural one, which means he's dead, right? But the druid says, "Hey, we're gonna." Mike says we're gonna cast Spare the Dying, and now we find out that Spare the Dying has upgrades.
Yes. Well,
Yeah,
so
if
he cast Spare the Dying on the Paladin later. He cast Revivify
oh,
because
revivify.
you rolled a he was down one death save when we left.
Yes,
And then it wasn't the first roll of the night, but very early in the session, you rolled a nat one for his death save.
that's right.
I think you're second in the order, third in the order. So like very early in the night. And again, it was a moment, but it would have been like much more of a moment, at 11 o'clock last week than whatever, 7 o'clock this week. But yeah, and then the Pally went down and he cast Revivify and the I want to go through like every cantrip now. I thought I did, but it scales at level 5. So like damage cantrips increase with the tiers, right? It goes from whatever. It's a D8, now it's 2d8 at level 5. Spare the Dying is a touch spell, and in my mind is just a touch spell. Again, I'm like re-examining all of my assumptions because the game changed underneath us while we were
Yeah,
in the middle of playing a
yeah. A
campaign.
lot of the descriptions changed.
And yeah, sure enough, it's now at level 5 you gain 30 feet, and then at level 11 it's 60, and then at 17 it's like I think it's a buck 20 or whatever.
Mhm.
But I really like that. I like the fact that it's brought into balance with the way the other cantrips work. I'm interested how they upscaled other cantrips that don't necessarily have a simple, easy numerical, like things that aren't just doing damage. Like does mending, does light, do all these,
Weird things.
weird
Yeah,
utility cantrips
yeah,
that I just like know
yeah.
backwards and forwards and never think about anymore. Like
Try to
is
make them a little more.
prestidigitation doing more things at level 5? I don't know. I gotta find out. Tell me in the comments, or I'll go read it myself. But
Well, part of that's yeah, definitely. Like we want comments, so like we'll answer questions. The neat thing about well, there was an idea that you had, and it's probably been adapted in other systems. That let's say there's just 10 spells. There's a
mm,
fire spell. So what's a fire spell? Well, it starts out as like you can like use light, maybe you like light your finger on fire, and then it turns into firebolt, and then, or I'm sorry, control flames. Then it turns into firebolt. Then it turns into uh, fireball. So and then that increasingly gets bigger at higher levels, and you can cast it at any level below that if you as your level increases. That's a really interesting system. I really like that idea.
and I wish I knew. I've read a million systems in 2 years, so I wish I could give credit where credit's due. I'm not sure where I first heard that idea, but like, yeah, when I make my fantasy heartbreaker, it's going to be
Yeah.
like a spell that levels up, that tiers up. You cast it with the first slot, it does one thing, and then your seventh level spell slot, it's the same spell, just like you're putting more mana, chutzpah, juice into it.
Mm,
And that's yeah. So fire bolt and meteor swarm are the same spell, just in the hands of a more powerful wizard.
right, right. And I think that sort of leveling gives you, I mean, it allows for character narrative, right? It
Yes.
allows for the evolution of the character, and it gives uh someone impetus to do that, right? So the it would also, I think, encourage someone to stay on one track instead of multi-classing and try to game the game, right? In order to acquire like certain types of spells, you're rewarded by staying in a certain, like you're a wizard evoker, like you're rewarded for staying in that path because you get these more powerful evoker spells.
Yeah, and then when there are fewer spells in the game structure, then you are learning fewer spells, right? So you're not gonna the wizard spell book is gonna be fewer pages essentially
Right.
because like you know 3 spells, but like those 3 spells are actually 12 spells potentially. So like and from the design side of things, it like fire is always the example because that's the darling of D&D and D and all of the systems that have come after. But like that from the design side, that forces the game maker to figure out, all right, you got control water. Like what's the seven stages of the water spell, the acid spell, the lightning spell, whatever. Every school of magic, every damage type, what does mending look like at seventh level, right?
Right.
Healing spells. Uh, so yeah, I just like I don't know, we're getting into abstract territory of like
Sure,
the
sure.
game I would make, but yeah, I really like that concept.
Well, back to more concrete things. So we found out that sneak attack, because my character's a rogue, and I'm always like sneak attack, sneak attack. I want to get sneak attack. So we found out it specifies allies must be within 5 feet of your target because there was a situation where,
Yeah, very interesting. It was like monster on monster violence was happening because again, you've triggered three encounters. The undead weren't going to attack the priest, but they were attacking his allies once the priest was dropped and they couldn't see his medallion, which came up later. That was kind of like some foreshadowing for you guys too.
mm,
But yeah, and we talked about it a lot. And again, in Ryan's fantasy system, it would be if the target is currently in combat, because you are taking advantage of a distraction in my mind. And the way it's worded now, it almost feels implied that you were taking advantage of some sort of like teamwork with your ally who's in melee.
yeah,
But like in the narrative structure of the game, this guy is was facing away from you.
right.
First of all, is 180 degrees, paying attention to a large, literally a swarm of skeletons. So the rogue's ability to line up like the perfect little sneak attack, like kidney shot, and get through the defenses of the target should have procced. And if we were having that conversation 6 months ago, 4 months ago, I would have been like, yeah, perfect. But right now, I'm trying to hew as close as I can to rules as written, or
Yeah,
at least intended.
yeah.
So we let it ride, kind of like by the book. Um,
Yeah, narratively, it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, what's the ultimate sneak attack? You're attacking something else, something attacks you from behind. But but what we have been doing and what has made a lot of sense is the paladin's been rushing and getting close to an enemy, buffing his AC so that it's harder for him to hit, and then I can snipe from afar and get that those extra 2d 6 damage. But ideally, you're rolling with, as a rogue, you're rolling with advantage. So if you're using a ranged attack, you can use steady aim to give yourself advantage if you don't have advantage in another way. And now you've got, a chance of, you've increased your chances to crit. So now you're going to get 4d6, right? So on that, and actually you're going to get your regular damage with the bow. I'm using a light crossbow, so that'd be
it's-
6d6.
yeah, you crit. It's two. I think it's a D8. Oh no, I'm thinking of rapier.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, that's a big buff for rogues. Everyone's like,
it's
oh, rogues
big.
didn't get low, but like, yeah, steady aim is a big deal. Is a big deal. You're increasing your odds of critting every time.
Yeah.
And you can now use your bonus action. It was always the loop was like bonus action hide, and then it's a roll. You're very good at it, so it's unlikely that you're gonna fail that roll, but
Yeah, the
occasionally you're
thing,
gonna fail that roll. Now
y-
you have more things you can do. If you get into trouble and disengage.
I think my camera just made me hide. Just went
You,
out of focus.
you passed your stealth check. It
Yeah,
didn't focus on
I
you
used
anymore.
my bonus action on my camera. But yeah, the thing with, but the trade-off is, with steady aim is that you forfeit your movement. So, so you can't
That's
do
true,
that
actually. Yeah.
hide. You can't just like, can't go run behind a rock. So that's the trade-off, and that's fine. So sometimes you have to stand your ground, basically. But yeah,
And it's always these like interesting edge cases. Like as much as the book is 300 page, sets of rules, there's still things that slip through the cracks, and it's pretty rare that you have monster on monster. It's pretty rare that I'm doing damage on myself, it's not very fun to watch the dungeon master fight himself for very long. It's cool the first time it happens, like, oh, if I because you lined it
We
up too.
outsmarted them. Yes, right.
Yeah, you outsmarted them and lined it up so that the enemy was between you and the other enemy, essentially the neutral undead mass. Um,
Which doesn't care what it's lashing out at. Right.
essentially.
Yeah.
So the like I said, on another night, I would have ruled it differently, and maybe I should have ruled it differently too. Like I'm
Those are
open
the
to admitting,
rules. We've been trying to learn the rules correctly first. So like I was studying English, um, writing, they were saying, learn how to do it correctly.
yes,
Yes, Hemingway does it differently here. Yes, Fitzgerald does it differently here. But learn the correct way to do it, and then you can break the rules.
yes,
Right.
yeah, and that's kind of where we're back at that, and it's refreshing in a lot of ways and a good learning experience to put yourself back into that beginner's mind. And it requires effort on my part again and
Hmm.
again
Yeah.
because I fall into my patterns, my habits, and my moves, right? Like I've been building up 5e Dungeon Master moves for a decade now, and occasionally the language is different. The verbiage that controls what's happening at the table is different as far as the book is concerned. And I can ignore that, or I can open myself up to being like, okay, I'm going to try this new way. We're going to see how it interacts with all of the other new things that I might not even be aware of yet.
Hmm.
And then I am going to judge it and decide what my preference is. But we are so, especially in this day and age, we're very quickly eager to jump to conclusions because we just want, in a D&D context, we want to keep things moving as the dungeon master.
Sure.
And just in life, I guess, I don't know, we want to expend the mental energy to think about it or be uncertain. But it is useful to spend a little more time in that mental space of like, I don't know. Let's find out together. I enjoy that, and I encourage other people to do that because I don't hear that a lot. Like the general dungeon master advice is like make the call, go look it up by yourself, explain it to the people later. And yeah, sometimes that's the right answer, but I don't think that is always the right answer or often the right answer.
No, I mean, I'm still learning things. I learned last night, for instance, this skeletal juggernaut, if it's already been damaged, it continues to take, like on its turn, 10
Mm.
damage immediately because it's losing its integrity. So it's essentially coming apart. It's a solid statue, let's say, that has been chipped and now it's turning to rubble. And I like that visualization as well. And that's an interesting mechanic. I've never
Such a good
run a
mon
monster like that.
Such a good monster. Such a
Mhm.
good monster. I mean, the waves of skeletons to like the swarm of skeletons is cool, but like swarm mechanics are kind of baseline vanilla, but the Voltron of a million skeletons got together and made one super giant skeleton,
Mhm.
and it is slowly shedding pieces and falling apart because there's no connective tissue,
Yeah,
literally.
yeah, yeah. It's like a sandstorm or something. It's
Hmm.
in and of itself, like its constituent parts are coming out of it. Yeah, that was cool. And then there was a later monster, which we called the I forget what you called it, Baba Yaga, not Baba Yaga, but like a Bodak, and it had like an a area of effect that was like darkness, like evilness, like there was an evil aura. And if you started your turn in that aura, you took damage, right?
And we actually had this conversation last night too. I'm a less is more kind of guy. I feel like the lo-fi image on the map that's just an outline allows your imagination to fill things in better. Like whatever. I'm also an English major. I consider myself pretty decent at like descriptions and creating evocative situations, but there was no art for that guy, and I was like, I don't know what this is. And we looked it up, and it was the thing in my imagination was better than what the
Yeah,
art was.
yeah.
But the art's like the baseline jumping off point, and I was like, should I know what this is? Is this like some sort of folkloric cryptid creature that I just don't know about? Or did Gary Gygax make this up because he found a weird, toy from China 50 years ago? Or like where did this come from? What is this?
Yeah,
How do I make it scary?
we don't know where inspiration comes from, right? It's just
Mhm.
the weirdest thing. We were having some side conversations at the table last night. We were talking about where the oh, it's a trap. We were going through a bunch of
Mm,
traps.
mm,
So of
mm.
course, we were talking about Admiral oh shoot, now I can't remember his name.
Is it Akbar?
Akbar,
It is
Admiral
Akbar, yeah.
Akbar. So yeah, and you're like I said, yeah, calamari, and you said calamari. I'm like, yeah, his species is called the Mon calamari. I said sometimes Lucas didn't go far away from the source to figure out his names for things, and that was definitely one of them. But now it's canon, so do what you want with it. Uh, but yeah, so looks like a what do you call it? Mollusk,
Yeah.
right? So call it a squid.
Uh,
Hilarious.
so
So this skeletal juggernaut was attacking this gladiator, right? And the gladiator had this like shield bash kind of thing going on,
yes.
which could knock people prone. So at one point I thought about trying to cast Vicious Mockery on him. Oh no,
Mm,
I'm sorry, Tasha's Hideous Laughter to
mm,
get him prone because
hmm.
now the paladin was standing next to him, and I thought that might help. But he had been bloodied, and so we were close. So I just kept like throwing damage on him. But sometimes I like to make jokes. In fact, on my channel, I have this whole thing where there was an online generator that did like vicious mockery
Mm.
insults. So I just did a bunch of those like voice acting. So people can like pull them up while they're playing D&D and like if they want, they can play them at the table or I can play them at the table. But
Nice.
I also have a couple where I do jokes and I need to do more of those, especially the Tasha's hideous laughter jokes because
Mm,
there's this one young person who plays at the one table and eventually sometimes. And at one point she was talking about a flump, and her joke about the flump was she was casting Tasha's hideous laughter. And so she told the joke, and we're like, well, what's the joke? Right. And she
hmm.
said something like, how do you make a flump laugh? You give them 10 tickles
Mm.
because they're like
Yeah, yeah,
jellyfish
yeah.
and they have tentacles. And so we're all busting out laughing because this 9-year-old tells this joke. So I looked up a gladiator joke and it was, what did Spartacus say when the lion ate his wife? Nothing. He was gladiator. And
Oh.
it's so bad,
Hmm.
but like, it's fun to have those little moments, especially in combat, where you can like release the tension a little bit
Yes.
and fun things happen, like the natural one on the death save, even though that's not funny for the NPC, but it was an NPC, so it's funny. But another, if it were one of us player characters, we might not be so enthused about that. But
Yeah, and
our
players can prep. You can between sessions. Think about what you're gonna do. Think about cool moves or sound bites or just story beats that you're looking for opportunities to enact. It's not just the dungeon master who can be thinking about the game between sessions and preparing for making cool things happen at the table.
Yeah, and it adds to the flavor. I play bards a lot. I have one particular bard I play, and I usually come prepared with like song lyrics, like or t song
Mm,
titles
mm.
of that to tie into things. Sometimes I do it at the table. Sometimes I have it already prepared. But yeah, I mean, at the end of a session, especially if we're already in combat, I usually leave a note to myself as to what I was intending to do next.
Mm.
And then it's interesting to see when we take a picture of the map and we reassemble the map and put the figures on the grid, whether or not I still want to do that because you've had like a week to think about it. So your point of view is completely different now. It's
Yeah,
very
sometimes the
interesting.
point of prep isn't necessarily to enact the plan that you've created. In the meantime, it's the exercise of it all. It's the reps between sessions that keep you limber mentally and strong imaginatively.
Exactly. Exactly. Speaking of which, at one point we decided that we were going to maybe have to shoot down these flying creatures, these manticores. So we thought,
Mm,
well, how would we do that? And we were thinking about ballistas.
mm.
And so then all of a sudden we just fell into the idea of ship upgrades, which is a part of
Which I've
Ghosts of
been waiting.
Saltmarsh. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been waiting for you guys to ask. There's like magical ship upgrades, which are quite expensive, but we're starting to get to that place where you don't have much to do with your money anymore.
Mm.
And the whatever bounties are getting higher and higher. So it's like I think it's 15,000 GP off the top of my head, but
For a magical ballista. Yeah.
there's some pretty cool stuff. And again, it was the day of the DMG being in our hands, so I opened up the siege weapons, and there's like a lightning cannon. There's all sorts of crazy crap.
Yes,
Uh,
but no prices.
but no prices on siege weapons, which like a ballista, again, yes, it's not perfect, ladies and gentlemen.
No, I mean, that's okay. It's just it's
It is
it's
frustrating though. It should be. This is
yeah,
a. So I was like, all right, a ballista is how. A ballista is a giant crossbow. How big of a crossbow? I was like, all right, let's do a 10x multiplier. All right, the ballista is 500.
right.
The lightning cannon, all right, is a third level spell scroll times what? So maybe 10. So like that's going to inform. So as if you can logically fake your way there, that's cool. And you can open up if you have a mature group of players at the table who are going to try to arrive at the truest answer, not the best answer for them. Right.
Right,
You
right.
can open it up to the group and be like, all right, how many crossbows in a ballista? How many heavy crossbows in a ballista? 10? Does that feel right? And then, you can negotiate from there. But yeah, it's not always just on the dungeon master to figure stuff out when there isn't
No,
a clear answer at the table.
but the DMG, the Dungeon Master's Guide, is known for being like kind of the magic items list. I mean, that's one of the things
Yes.
the 2014 DMG was used for. And in fact, one of our early videos was just about like what are
Yeah,
some
yeah,
of
yeah.
our favorite tier one, tier two. Um, yeah, and I actually just reposted a couple of those videos. I re-edited that video into shorter videos. So there's some of those
That was
recently
a good
posted
one.
on
That
my
was a that
channel.
was a that was a good one. We got creative with that one.
I do like that. We could probably, I mean, obviously we can do that now with the new ones once we read through them, but they have prices, right? So
Mm.
it does make sense. And now we have like the bastion rules for like, your hideout. So those things are going to cost money. So I'm sure that there's lists for that. So it is kind of a glaring oversight that there wasn't excuse me, um
Because it
prices
was
for ship
literally the
upgrades.
first question that came up. It's not what does the ballista do in combat,
Right.
right? What the answer wasn't, all right, it's
Can
got a
we
plus
even
six
afford it?
modifier to hit. It's like, I want one, how do I get one? Well, you buy it. And like, okay, in this town, maybe you're not going to find the lightning cannon pretty quick, but like, I'm sure there's a ballista around. Okay, cool. How much does it cost? Shit, hold on. Let me think about this because I don't have an answer handy right now.
Right. Or there's somebody that can make one. And that was kind of cool too. It had development time, so that was interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's the Ghost of Saltmarsh
Salt
side
marsh.
of things. That has
Hmm.
prices and time. But again, there's also one answer for like, I don't know, 20, 30 items. It's a little more satisfying, but it does feel like an upgrade to your whatever, the keel of the boat and the weapons and the sails and the crew. These all should be like potentially different things. Yeah, I want again, you can tell my preferences from the spell conversation earlier. Like, give me tiers of things.
Hmm.
So like something's available earlier on, and then we can upgrade from there.
Sure. And what is
Um,
the effect? So, like,
yeah,
obviously damage effects for weapons, but like if you upgrade the keel, what does that do for you? Does it make the ship more
yeah. I mean, it's basically your
make it
your
more
ship has an
stable, make it
AC. Yeah,
faster? What does it do? So yeah,
yeah. It hasn't come up. There hasn't been a lot of ship to ship combat. I think because people are. It hasn't come up yet, and it may soon.
yeah,
Uh,
there's mechanics for that in Spelljammer and other places. I think Skag has it. But there's uh there's a lot of aftermarket. There's people that have worked on this, right?
yes.
And used other systems and used like wargaming systems in
A
order
friend
to
of ours,
do
Phil,
this.
has a very good Spelljammer let's call it a supplement. It's that feels like underselling it almost.
Oh,
But
Phil
on the DM's
Kearney.
Guild,
Oh
Phil Kearney on the
yeah,
DM's Guild has some very good ones.
absolutely.
And like, yeah, it's not very, you can squint and change, starship to starship combat, spelljammer to spelljammer
Sure.
combat to boat combat, no problem. That's a good one off the top of my head. Homie and the Dude have they also have like Sky Zephyrs.
Hmm.
And they're doing like a kind of like Dune Mad Maxi thing next
Oh,
year.
cool.
Uh, yeah, I think I'm allowed to say that. Whoops. But yeah, there's a lot of systems out there because the official ones are lacking a little bit. The siege weapons did have okay, it takes one action to load, it takes one action to aim, it takes one
Right.
action to fire. So that the action economy is there. The economy is not, but
So if you have a
step in the right
three-person
direction.
crew, you can do it maybe in one round. But if you're doing it by yourself, then you have three separate actions. So maybe it takes
Yes.
3 rounds. And that can be a dramatic thing too. This is like Game of Thrones kind of thing, or you're the last, you know, you're on the battlements and the crew gets destroyed. So the dragon's making another turn, another pass. So like you're the only one up there. You have X amount of time before it comes to bear and lets loose its fire breath upon you. So yeah, that could be pretty cool stuff. What else do I got? I got um, the manticores understand common but can't speak common. That was something that came up. Like, what is the difference between like a creature that understands a language but maybe isn't conversant in it? And we
Yeah.
had the idea with the undead, they may not have the vocal cords for it, so that makes sense. But
So the manticores speak common
I speak common.
as written. They have language common, which is fun to surprise the players with. You guys were smart. You did recon, you did a lot of preparation, you did planning, as we were saying before. So I think actually you rolled a pretty darn good Arcana check. And it's like, yeah, these things talk. These things talk.
Mhm.
You can go speak to these things, and that kind of opened the door in your minds to, okay, this could be a social encounter. If it's not, I'm going to go hide in these dunes and I'll snipe them if it goes sideways.
Right.
But an undead, right? So like fast forwarding a little bit, you guys are fighting a minotaur skeleton, and it understands abyssal but does not speak.
Mm.
And that's the verbiage in the stat block in the monster manual.
And then you did something really fun with Abyssal too, which was that one character knows Abyssal,
Mm,
another character doesn't, but the character that doesn't is holding like the magical amulet that's keeping these monsters at bay. So he wants to see if he can command them. So he asks for a command from the person who's fluent or is knows how to speak Abyssal, and then he has to do a performance check in order to imitate that phrase. And I absolutely love that. Somebody who loves foreign languages as I do
mm.
and does Duolingo every day and like just study them in college. So I enjoyed that because, well, just go ahead and run with that.
Yeah, I mean, performance is undervalued. It did give me pause for a minute. Like, what kind of a check is this, right? It feels like intelligence based, maybe, but like, it's imitation, it's mimicry. And I did give him advantage on the roll because he was literally being helped by the person who did speak Abyssal. But he rolled even with advantage. He rolled quite poorly, and I was just like, "Nope, you did like there are different phonemes, right? Like if you have never spoken this language, you can't, I can't trill my R's in Spanish very well. I can almost approximate it, but like essentially, I have a speech impediment in Spanish. Abyssal, I mean, off the top of my head, it's very like guttural, right? Throaty, but like there's sounds in Abyssal that don't exist in common that this gnome may never have made before, and therefore what he's saying is not a one-to-one translation of what was said to him. He can't just that game of telephone has broken down now because I don't know, he rolled an 8 or a 9. I didn't like it could happen, but it's not a guarantee. If you teach me I went hiking with Germans for 6 months and they tried to teach me a word a day and that lasted a week because like they would say a word in German and I would make sounds. They were rarely right and then I could spend you know 10, 15 minutes trying to get the sounds right and then I would forget it the next day. But yeah, there's no guarantee that it's not just like you know the password. It's more than that. You are speaking a language, even if it is just like a singular word or two of a command to get this creature to understand you.
That
So
was,
yeah, I'm curious what
yeah.
other people would rule that as, but performance felt right because it's underutilized.
Well, that was a great mechanic. And for D&D, it's so perfect because you do have like Kenku,
Hmm.
who mimicry is their thing. So
Right.
that would have been fine if we had a Kenku in the party. Probably would have been, maybe it wasn't even a check, maybe it was, I mean, certainly with advantage, but maybe they can just do it. And the thing with the R's, there's so many, like the Spanish rolling R is different if there are two R's as opposed to one R, and if the
Hmm.
R is at the beginning of the sentence and then or the word, and then if I'm not mistaken, I may be wrong about that. Of course, feel free to correct me, all of our Spanish speaking uh, fans, and it's different than,
Erde and erde are different letters, different phonemes, and
yeah,
like I don't distinguish them very well because
we're
I
not
have
used to hearing them,
it's
right?
essentially it's a speech impediment. I didn't
Sure.
grow up hearing that sound. I'm very bad at making that sound because whatever. I didn't
That's
learn it
right.
when it was easy for me to learn.
Yeah, and it's different from the French R, it's different from the Italian R, it's
Mm.
different from, so it's, and that's just something that we're in the same language family with, right?
And you're talking about the same biological structures, right? Like
Right.
abyssal is a language for a different like category of species, right? Like you're
Sure.
talking about a different, I don't know, up the taxonomical chain of like it's a different kingdom. You're talking about
Uh,
the speech of demons, right?
that's why people who can do bird calls are so
Mm.
amazing, and because they can, and that's a different thing. It's the click languages,
Yeah, yeah, sure.
how do you even write that, right? So like upside down exclamation point or something like that. I don't know. It's
Oh, there's got to be like typography for it,
There
but
is,
yeah,
but would I be able to read that? And I know a
right,
lot.
exactly.
I know a little bit about languages, but I don't know that one. So there's, that would be, so if I saw script written, or if I am trying to, and that's another thing too. Like, let's say you come across some hieroglyphics in a dungeon. Are you going to be able to read that? Maybe you could read it and understand it, but you may not know what it sounds like.
Mm,
Or if
hmm.
it does, and then there's the other thing, if you know what it should sound like, can you make those sounds? So that's the performance check part of it. Yeah, I thought that was wonderful. I just thought that was absolutely
And
wonderful.
I think it's a really good example of what like checks should be like in D&D. Like the gnome doesn't is unaware if they're succeeding or not,
Right.
right? Like your rogue hides to the best of their ability.
But they don't know
They
for 100% if
they
they're
don't know
hitting.
100% if they're seen or not. Every time. It doesn't matter if you rolled a 3 or a 33. Maybe there's some sort of understanding of the situational awareness there in character, but for the most part, the character does their best and they're uncertain of the outcome if dice have come into it, right? Like you move the curtain, there's a secret door behind the curtain, I'm going to give it to you. If
Well,
you roll the
that we
dice
got with the
before
nat
I
20.
get,
That was pretty fun.
well, there was so this is why players don't roll dice before you're asked to.
Oh,
Well, one, it's considered bad etiquette. It doesn't bother me, but it is considered bad etiquette. But two, straight up, they're like, I'm going to look for, I think it was Bertram. I'm going to look for secret doors behind this curtain.
no, it was me.
You rolled, well, I had to leave it as an investigation at that point because it felt wrong. But he auto rolled an investigation check. And if he
Hmm.
hadn't touched the dice, he would have just found that door. But he rolled a 7.
Uh,
And there is a passive perception in the book or whatever.
oh
But
yeah,
like,
he tied it. It was like a 9 or something. Yeah.
He he rolled a check. I didn't ask for that check.
Right.
He would have auto succeeded, and now he created a fail state for himself. And I kind of had to. I didn't have to, but like it felt
Yeah.
natural to like, okay, we're gonna now the dice are deciding this, whereas your action as like your player skill would have decided this, but now random number generation is deciding whether or not you found the door.
Well, that's a really good point. See, that's not something that, I mean, it's something that I've come up against, but I don't think that I've heard it like verbally stated before. But yeah, maybe that should be an announcement at the next Adventure League I run, or next time I teach beginners, is don't roll the dice unless I ask because you may not have to.
Well, I think that's the best pitch from the dungeon master's side. I might let you succeed if you do a thing and it should work.
Yeah, you walk
It's
up some
good.
steps.
It's going to work. The dice, you roll a check when the outcome is uncertain. I move a curtain and there's a door behind that curtain. There is an uncertainty in that aspect to me. You, I don't know. You tap on the floor with the 10-foot pole where there's a trap. You trigger that trap.
Right.
There's no uncertainty for me. You you're a rogue and you threw your short sword at a tripwire. I was like, yeah, that'll do it. I'm not, I'm ready for like I have a DC for thieves tools, but you hit it with a sword. Your sword's over there now, but like, yeah, that's auto succeeds. It is considered bad etiquette too. It is like literally bad table manners, I
That's
guess.
pretty interesting. I
Um,
did not know that, but
in
that's good to
certain
know.
again in certain circles, I don't know if that's like how
Oh,
cultural that is, but
I think
like
that's great to know.
because sometimes also success is not on the table. Like
Yeah,
you
like you can't, doesn't matter if you roll a natural 20,
I want to I
you're
want to
not gonna
convince the
just,
king to abdicate his throne. That's a 33 persuasion check.
yeah,
Like a critical success. It's like too bad, buddy. Like
that's not
that's
happening.
not a thing you can do.
Hmm.
That we're not relying on the dice to determine this particular outcome.
Yeah.
That's a less friendly way of explaining the situation. But like
No, but it
I will
makes
give you
sense.
success if you what you're doing would work. I'm going to let it work without asking the dice if it did or didn't.
Yeah, that's excellent. Excellent. That's exactly what these kinds of videos are about for like DMs that want to run. So, so we were doing, let's talk about Bertram's Fireball. That was
Mm.
a lot of fun. So we find this room behind this curtain. I sneak down the rogue sneaks down the corridor, um, observes a 30 by 30 room, which just happens to be a wonderful radius for Fireball. And there's like seven figures in the room. So finally, finally, the sorcerer gets to do the thing that the sorcerer has wanted to do since like day one, you know. So
Prepping the battlefield is huge. D&D players should read the War of Art, right? Like you snuck down, you did recon, you went back, you told them what was happening. That the dice determined. You rolled really well. You're built to do that.
mhm.
So the enemy's unaware that you were there. You also controlled your light sources intelligently. So you didn't, you shine a beacon on somebody. I don't care if their passive perception is an 8. They know that
Yeah,
there's a flashlight beam. Um, and then yeah, you got to act first. Surprise is different now, but essentially like you not only got the drop on these guys, you determined your own initiative order. So like we're gonna kick off this battle. He's gonna run and he's gonna cast fireball. And again, because they are undead, the I decided in that moment like the scariest thing I could do or like the most dramatic thing I could do was silence. It was like nothing. Like these things don't make no you just dropped a bomb in this room full of creatures and like you hear fireball makes noise in my mind. I don't know about everybody else, but like this confabulation is noisy, it's sucking oxygen into the room, it's roaring flames. They don't vocalize a response. And
right.
that's like that like I don't know. That builds tension for me. That's the horror movie moment of like you shot this thing and it doesn't
Was
seem
it
to care.
effective, right?
Yeah.
Do
I
we
mean it
know?
worked.
Right.
I didn't want to
Sure.
like say like oh they're immune to fire, but just
Right.
like they're not screaming in pain the way like most creatures would.
Sure. Sure. Uh,
Um
the one thing came up also a rule, and it turned out I thought it was a 2024 rule, but it turns out it was a Xanathar rule from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. It was Healing Spirit, the spell that the Druid cast, and you called it like a healing car wash, which I loved. I love that analogy. So like he casts an area effect, and then player characters can walk through it several times apparently
yeah.
and gain the benefits of it while the spell lasts.
I need to go look at that this morning because like I'm surprised I
I didn't
haven't
look it up
seen
either.
that
I should have,
in
yeah.
play more often and I wonder if it's like I wonder what the downside is because Xanathars has been around for 7, 8 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is it like I don't know. Why is that
Xanathar's like the
so?
first like real big amendment to the rule set.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, it was Xanathar's and then I mean you get like little dribs and drabs from setting books, but it
Yeah.
was Xanathar's and then Tasha's.
That's what
And
they were designed to do.
yeah, and it's spoiler, some of the new things in 2024 are things from Xanathar's and Tasha's.
Mhm. Yeah,
Not
the good stuff
not
that
that
people
new.
liked. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so is it new? It's codified. Let's put it that way.
The yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
I would have preferred new stuff, but that's just me.
Oh, I'm still ready to read it. I can't wait to read
Oh, I'm
the
pumped. I'm
Dungeon
pumped.
Master
It's not on the shelf
Catechism.
because I'm current because it's downstairs where I'm gonna read it. Yeah.
Yep. So that'll be fun. And then we can talk more about those videos. So where did we leave this session for the like cliffhanger moment for the viewers
You
out there?
you guys are exploring a hallway full of traps, just like traps, 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 traps.
Old school D&D.
Old school D&D exploration. This is not by the book, but I enforced dungeon turns. It takes you 10 minutes to do a thing. We're not in, I'm not going to hold you to your movement speed, but what is your character doing right now? Cool. This is how that resolves. What is your character doing right now? And I did it around the table, which is just like, like poker rules. It's easy to see.
Yeah.
You go first, you go next, you go next, you go next. What's your character doing? And sometimes the answer was like waiting, nothing, and that's a totally acceptable answer.
Or trying to coordinate something with another player character, and then you kind of like skip your turn and you order it so that you can coordinate something because your character's physically in a different
Yes.
adjacent or in the same hallway as that character. You
And
want
it's and
to
it's
help.
like it's a loose container, right?
Yeah,
Like your character walked past Patrick's character, so he's like, "Oh, can I do this?" And he was like, "Oh, I'll wait my turn." It's like, "No, like this is a moment for interaction. This is all happening abstractly within a 10-minute span.
right.
I'm not going to give you like a full like round of actions, but like if you're interacting with someone walking by you, like that's a thing you can do in seconds, not minutes." And I
And
forget
I
even
would
what he gave you like a piece of information or something. It wasn't like he didn't cast a spell or do a whole elaborate thing.
right, or you're like trying to help somebody out of a trap or something like that.
Right, right.
That's a good DM thing, like dungeon turns. That's a good thing for beginner DMs to know. You can use you don't have to call it initiative order, but you can use an order of operations to get people from like either you can do this for a couple of reasons. One, it's easy, for you because you take one person's thing at a time. Secondly, it prevents one character or one player from dominating non-combat situations.
Yes,
So you can like if you have a player that's kind of like enthusiastic and they're doing that, you can help deter that. And you can also include characters who may have withdrawn for whatever reason temporarily from the table so you can bring them in and give them a chance to participate. And this is really good for teaching. It's really good for beginner players, and it's good for different personality types so that you can kind of like give a more even economy of action across the player.
absolutely. At the end of the day, it's a game, and there's a reason like most every game is turn-based in one way or another, right?
Yeah,
Like,
you can try to approximate simultaneous moves, but at some point you have to we are linear, we have to like sort things out,
yeah.
You can all roll your dice at the same time, or you can all slap the card on the table at the same time, or you can all grab for the card at the same table at the same time. But at some point the game has to pause so you can keep score, right?
And from the Dungeon Master side of things, if you guys like you had fanned out, it was a pretty
Yeah.
big map, well, essentially a maze that you're exploring. But if you were in the same room, a lot of the time, I will collect what everybody wants to do and then resolve it in the most interesting way narratively, right? Like if
Mhm.
this person's going to find the secret door, this person's going to find the treasure chest, and you're the first act, you were going to strike out, and this person's going to trigger the monster attack, then like even if the monster was going to come up first at the table turn-based, like people at the table wise, I'm going to resolve that last and I'm going to bounce around. Okay, you find nothing, you find a secret door, you find this treasure chest, this monster jumps out in the scariest way possible. Now roll initiative. And I
Right.
will say I've learned from experience. I used to do it just as initiative, right? Like I invented dungeon turns myself before I knew there was more of like a codified old school way of doing it.
Mhm.
Or I knew that, but I used to keep people in initiative and that made them a little trigger happy. You know,
Yes, right,
you're
because they
conditioned to
associate.
think that that's fighting.
Right,
So, and again, it doesn't like okay. And it happened a little bit last night. People would move. We're like counting squares. It's like, no, this is 10 minutes, not 6 seconds.
right.
You have your freedom of movement. So even if you're doing it the same way from the behind the screen, calling it something else from the player's perspective changes their experience of it.
And then there's one more thing with initiative. I was watching a video. I wish I could remember. I've watched so many. I can't give the credit, but I think they were running an old module, maybe Tomb of Horrors, and they were talking about larger parties. So, like, I guess a lot of times in the really early modules, they came from wargaming where there were a lot of people at the table. So, sometimes these parties had 6 to 10 players, right, in
Hmm.
a party. So what they did for initiative was not individual initiative, but sides. So like, so if you can imagine a battle, right? So if you're playing like the Battle of Agincourt, right? Like, you know, the English roll for initiative, the French roll for initiative, and then one side has initiative over the other. So the same thing you can do for the players and the monsters. And then when it's the player's turn, like you say, you could allow each player to, you could allow them to orchestrate their turns as a
Hmm.
plan, right? So
Hmm.
that it's like the rogue goes and looks, then the sorcerer casts fireball, then the paladin goes in after the fireball subsides. You can do it in that way as well. So initiative doesn't have to be static in the way that we understand it. Everybody rolls, gets their bonus on initiative, and then we go in that turn. And also you can have initiative that's all not rolled.
Yeah.
People like to roll dice, but there's a rule that says like you can just like write down everybody's like, you know, initiative and just when it's time to go into combat, that's the order they go in.
Yeah. You can make any skill or ability, pretty much any ability, static, right?
Right.
Your passive perception is the DC for a creature to hide. Well, not anymore, actually, though. I take that back. But your passive perception is 10 plus your perception modifier. You have a passive insight. You have a passive initiative. You can use that. You can also, one thing I really like as like kind of a compromise between people like to roll dice and I like the game to run faster and initiative takes a beat between the dramatic moment and then like it's okay, now we're gonna do some accounting for a minute. I used to roll initiative at the start of the session or the first you
Mm,
roll or once per session. I've done
mm,
I've done both.
mm,
But like, all right, I'm gonna keep we're gonna roll initiative. That's your initiative order. I'm gonna roll for the monsters, and for the rest of the night, I'm just gonna fill them in where they lay.
mm.
I
That's
do like
easier for the dungeon master for sure.
it's less work, it's less steps. It's
Yeah.
also it's way easier if you have an initiative tracker. If you have like I used to use physical
Yeah.
pieces of paper on the dungeon master screen. There's
Mhm.
that the flagpole thing
Yeah,
is
that's pretty
is
cool.
fun.
I've seen people use clothes pins.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. You can do
Mhm.
just like stand up card, like you could fold pieces of paper so they stand up by themselves because I don't use a screen anymore, so I don't use the initiative tracker anymore.
Yeah,
But
I
we
do
could
it on
start
my
to,
screen. Mhm.
yeah, that's great. Side-based
Mhm.
initiative it is cool. I find it's like not as intuitive. I think because everyone's just got like 5e hardwire into their brains
Yeah,
now. But like, I mean, old school essentials is my preferred interpretation of 2e and advanced and whatever, all the old school systems.
right.
Um, but it's cool. You decide what you're going to do, and that includes the order of operation for your team, right? The wizard's going to cast fireball before I run in there and slice the guy.
Mm.
Then you roll initiative based on the sides. It's just a d6. There's no modifier. Maybe there's circumstantial bonuses some of the time, but side versus side each round, and then your plan works or it doesn't, basically, right? You decide what
Mm.
you're going to do. You launch into action simultaneously. They're launching into action. So it's okay. Do you get hit with an arrow before you go running? to battle or not. And
Right.
it feels a little more true to the simulation of the chaos of combat. And it creates a situation if you're doing side-based each round, rolling initiative, I guess it works side-based or individually. It creates situations where potentially someone's going to go two times in a row before you go once,
Right.
and that can really tip the scales.
That takes imagination. And also, I think that works better with, for me, it would work better with smaller numbers of people in the conflict.
Sure.
But just one more thing back to the note cards on the folded note cards over top of the DM screen. That's useful for me, especially in classroom environments, because then I can learn the students' names, especially early on, and also in adventure league environments where players may not know each other yet. They may have
Mm.
just met. So now I can put their real name and their character name on the cards, and then people don't have to keep asking each other what their names are, people's names are. And also, we can determine between whether or not we're speaking to the player in meta or if we're in character speaking to the character. So it solves some issues rather elegantly. So,
And if you literally, let me find something that doesn't have a bunch of words on it. If you have a piece of paper folded in half,
mhm.
right, like an index card or whatever, and you're putting it on your screen, this side could have, character's name, player's name. This side could also have that. And, those passive
AC,
abilities that we were
hit
talking about,
points.
AC, stuff I want to
Hmm.
know what languages they speak. That's something that I used to
Hmm.
always have on the Dungeon Master screen, and that's one thing I miss having about a Dungeon Master screen. I'm often asking you guys. I had it, I would write it down in the notes, but then be like flipping pages. It's faster to ask you, but I miss
Sure.
having that in front of me. Because like, what languages do you speak? One, slows the game down a little bit, but two, kind of tips the hand. We all take an
Yeah.
inventory, and it's just like, all right,
Yeah.
who
What's
speaks?
coming
Does
up
someone speak
next?
Draconic
Right.
or whatever? Yeah,
Right.
it's like,
Right.
no, all right, I cast tongues or whatever. Um,
Right. No,
yeah,
that's
yeah. I mean,
good.
these are English majors playing D&D. We're gonna mess with language.
We play to our strengths. If we were engineers, we would be playing Warhammer, or
Yeah,
something
right.
else. So, all right. Well, this has been a great session as always. So, thank you so much for your time. And
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
thanks everybody out there for watching. And feel free to leave comments about all the stuff that we talked about today. And if you like this, like it. See you on the next one.
Like.